Hey there, dear listener. If you enjoy this creepypasta and you're tuning in through a streaming platform, I'd love it if you'd start following this channel so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you're listening it on YouTube, I'd appreciate a subscription and a like. Enjoy the listen. There's something unholy underneath the Vatican. I've seen it. Part 1. I consider myself fairly modern as far as priests go. God's power manifests in minor, transcendental ways, and most matters of the earth really are of the earth. My parish is a little out of the way, just a few hundred people clustered around a minor cattle industry. Being the kind of priest I am, and having the sort of superstitious, old-fashioned flock I did, there were a few occasions where I acted as the voice of reason and secular empiricism when rumors started to circulate. When Pat Mayon half-joked he was seeing fairies in his garden at night, just like his old grandmother had always talked about, it was me who pressed him to head into town and get himself seen to, leading to him being diagnosed with a shot optic nerve that sent white lights flickering across his vision in the dark. I'd venture to say I was a gentle, restraining force, reminding people how rarely their ills can be linked back to the supernatural or darkly divine. This is why I was truly, genuinely surprised to find that Molly really was possessed. I knew something was wrong when her panicked mother led me into her room, and I found her completely naked and sitting in front of her dresser. She had become so thin, to the point that her limbs were gangly and insect-like. Her skin was solid gray, not like she was dying, but like she was dead. She didn't give any sign that she noticed my entrance. The room was destroyed, littered with broken perfume bottles, torn clothes, and anything you might find in a teenage girl's room, bent, broken, or shattered. She was perfectly still, looking straight ahead. I thought she must be enraptured by her own reflection, until I noticed that the dresser mirror had been shattered. "Molly?" I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. I forced myself to inch towards her, reaching out my hand. My finger tipped her bony shoulder, and there was an explosion of movement that made me throw myself back against the wall. When I collected myself, I saw that Molly was coiled, squatting in the corner of the room, one of the corners where the walls met the ceiling. Molly squeezed into it like a frog in defiance of gravity, her face now pulled back in a rabid grimace as she hyperventilated through clenched teeth. I froze, pinned back against the far wall like a rabbit in front of a wolf. I don't know how long I was there, locked in place by the age-old instinct that when you move, the predator pounces. That endless purgatory was eventually interrupted by a deep, echoing voice that spilled out of Molly, despite her mouth remaining closed. A flood of a voice that suffocated the entire room. "Stop thinking about Christ." I began to breathe faster. "Stop thinking about Christ," came the voice again. "Why?" I said. "He is hope. He is salvation. He is what you would term goodness. Thoughts like that are an irritant to my kind. Never mind that the fiction of him was created to cope with the reality of us. What he embodies is toxic to my kin." It was hard to reconcile the calmness and intelligence of the voice with the frothing, hanging beast that had once been Molly. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to hurt Molly, and I'm doing a good job." As much as this terrified me, it put the matter in no uncertain terms. I wasn't a good priest if I left. I wasn't anything I like to think I am. I reached for the crucifix, hanging on a chain around my neck, and pushed it outwards, towards Molly. There was a sound like stabbed cat, and I was rocketed back, slamming against the wall so hard, plaster rained down on me. I slid up off my feet, a colossal force pressing against and around my neck, something grasping my wrist with the strength of an ape. My eyes flickered open, and the blurring cleared until I could see Molly below me, looking up with crazed, furious eyes. Her eyes darted over to the crucifix, still clenched in my hand. "You think that will help you save Molly? Let's see." She grabbed the cross from my palm. I heard a wet sizzling, and a veil of steam started enveloping her hand. She held the cross between two fingers and began dragging them across her face, leaving red, bubbling streaks on her lifeless flesh. "It's working. See? See how you're saving Molly?" "Please stop," I screamed, before being thrown across the floor in a whacking, painful slide. A moment later, the cross clattered across the floor beside me, still steaming, deformed and melted. The moments after that are a frantic blur, but they ended with me collapsing out of the room and slamming the door closed behind me. I stood up, leaning against the wall for support, to see Molly's mother bawling at the far end of the hall. I looked down and saw my hands, clenched into half claws and shaking uncontrollably. "The Lord is with us all," I said in a shaking voice, "but I think I'm going to need to contact some people who the Lord is more with, a lot more with." I had to wait a little while in my sitting room. I'd called my bishop, and he said he'd call someone else, and I was waiting on the result of all that. My house was fairly standard for priest accommodations. Cozy, warm, wood-paneled. Kojak, the fit German shepherd I'd inherited from the parish's previous priest, was panting anxiously at my feet, looking concerned. I indulged a bad habit I'd slipped into, sticking my fingers in the whiskey I was drinking and letting Kojak lick it off. Not enough to affect him off course. He just seemed to like the taste. I looked at the table in front of my seat, and my eyes were drawn to the thin glass globe near its edge. The oceans fully transparent, the continents frosted. It looked very different than it had that morning. Bigger, less easily contained in my head, every tiny spot more mysterious than before. The phone rang and pulled me out of my thoughts. I answered straight away, desperate for some guidance. There were no introductions. The voice at the other end got straight into it. "We will arrive at Molly O'Neill's house in 1 hour. We will require your assistance and total cooperation by order of the Holy See. Please be there." I was standing outside the gate to Molly's house when the van pulled up. Not a limousine, not some fancy gleaming black affair with a chrome grille. It was a rusting white van that, now that I think of it, they had probably bought secondhand in the previous half an hour, so it couldn't be traced. The men who stepped out, however, looked about how I'd expected. Serious, stern, wearing the long frock-like priest clothes that I'd always thought would be more alienating than the black pants and shirt I wore. They stopped in front of me, silent for a second, as they looked me over with squinting, hard eyes. A series of crashes sounded from the window to Molly's bedroom, and we all saw a sharp elbow smash through the glass before being instantly sucked back in like paper through an airplane door. They stiffened their backs slightly, looking at the cavity. "This looks as though it constitutes a severe case," said one, a man in his 50s with well-combed orange hair. "Very severe," said the other, a younger man with thick black hair and a strong build, his face less lined but just as serious. "What do we have to do?" I asked. They both looked at me like it hadn't been my turn to speak. "In cases of genuine possession, we have a very strict system of dealing with the vessels. Just cooperate with us every step of the way," said the older one. "Vessels? We have to move it. As you may have already learned, judging by those bruises around your neck and the shakes you haven't quite settled, transporting something like this is no easy feat." Just as he said this, two more of Molly's limbs, and I would never be sure which two, burst out of the windows, flailing and spinning fast enough to blur before whipping back inside with the scritch of the glass dragged with them from the edges of the holes. The younger priest rapped his hand against the side of the van, and a dozen more figures spilled out, spreading themselves into a wide, staggered line and aiming lightweight machine guns at Molly's house, machine guns that had ornate crosses in the place of sights. Molly's house was far enough up the road and away from the village that I don't think anybody saw. It was probably something the priests had made plans to prevent in any case. The figures were all dressed in shells of black, plastic-like body armor, their faces concealed by visored helmets with grilled breathing slots. No skin whatsoever was visible. Their only identifying mark on their left shoulder plates. It was a gaudy, colorful quartet of boxes centered on a smaller green and gold crest, the boxes ranging from displaying simple striped designs to complex, hard-to-interpret tangles of objects and symbols. After a moment, and yes, it shouldn't have taken that long, I realized it was the symbol of the Swiss Guard. "They actually do something," I said. The two priests had withdrawn the most hefty, overworked crucifixes I'd ever seen in person. They were solid steel, only capable of being held in a full grasp, worked over in pearls and ivory, and several other obviously expensive white substances I couldn't be bothered to identify. They stormed in towards the house, crosses already held out in front of them. The guard followed, flowing after the striding priests automatically. It was in those last few seconds that I noticed something particularly troubling. One of the guards was not carrying a gun, but a thick silver collar at the end of an extendable pole, its outside edge covered in skinny jeweled bars, some stuck flat against the surface, other, smaller ones, sticking out on tiny hinges. It looked like the kind of thing you'd use to restrain a rabid dog. 10 minutes later, we were all sitting on bare iron benches in the bleak interior of the van. I was pressed between two of the guards, dense plates pressing in on me. Molly's capture and extraction had been loud, chaotic, and had required no small amount of reassurance of Molly's mother by me that it was all for the best and that her daughter would be fine. She was now at the opposite end of the passengers' area, towards the driver's compartment, pinned to the corner by the outstretched crosses of the priests and the aimed cross sights of a few of the guards. The dog catcher analog had been closed around her neck, held from a distance by another of the guards. She moaned and squealed pitifully in what I judged to be fear and pain. Twice, she attempted to leap forward towards the door, but each time the guard with the dog catcher would press a button on the pole. The smaller hinged bars on the collar would snap down over the larger ones, forming crosses. Waves of steam and smoke would cascade out over the silver as the smell and sound of sizzling meat swelled. Her throat would bubble and blister, crumple and boil down to a red swamp, before she would instantly collapse back to where she had been, screaming before the crosses were parted and the sizzling subsided. In the aftermath, she would moan and squeal even more than she had before. How did your crosses stop her? Mine didn't. The two priests looked back at me. The older one answered. Yours was probably made in a warehouse in Mongolia, where child laborers try not to burn themselves with molten steel. These ones have been blessed by every pope of the last 400 years, in full view of at least 12 archbishops, and then paraded in view of the faithful during papal visits. They are of a higher and meticulously tendered class of holiness. You fucking children, came Molly's voice. It wasn't the overbearing voice that had previously come from Molly. It was a weak, crackling sound, spoken with her mouth. The words were saturated with pain, screechy and drawn out. You idiots. It's not holy. It's all your delusion being dumped onto those objects. All your hope and desperation and love. Ideas about salvation. The arrogance of thinking that it's all on your side and the universe was made by a kind, guiding old man. You dump it onto the Pope like a waterfall of acid, and he soaks it up and dumps it onto those crosses only because people believe he can, because they give him permission to channel their poison. He dumps it, and he's helped out by all the archbishops you called them, and all those people at your parades and visits. So many people caught in the tamest level of hell and hoping for better. All their thoughts, unnatural thoughts, thoughts that could only exist in the epiderm, they get sprayed out and shower those fucking crosses. The pain in the voice started to fade away, replaced by growling malice. You think that means you're right, about God, about Christ, about divinity, but you're wrong. It's proof of how wrong those notions are, that the existence of them, their mere presence, is so scalding and wrong and impossible that it's death to us, to almost all life. Those ideas are eldritch and incomprehensible to anything from outside of the cold, half-world of the epiderm. They are aberrations, warped perversions possible only in your dark sliver of the universe. Perhaps I do not explain well enough. The universe is... The screaming came again. The guard handling the dog catcher had triggered it, standing up out of his seat. "Shut up!" he bellowed. "Shut up, you monster! Monster!" I tried to stand up and stop him, but was pulled back down by the guards beside me. A moment later, I saw the younger priest surge forward, sending the hysteric guard's armored head clanging into the iron wall with his elbow before wrenching the pole from his hands and releasing the hinges. Another guard rose to drag the now dazed man back away from Molly, still pinned down by the older priest's outstretched cross. "Do not speak again, aberration," said the younger priest. "Speak again, and we burn you to the bone." "Over my dead body," I shouted from the behind. Several guns snapped up to aim at me, and the old priest met my gaze. It quickly became apparent that my dead body was not as much of a moral obstacle as I'd thought it was. After another hour, the van slowed down, stopping a few times and picking up a little speed before stopping one final time. The older priest led me and the most of guards from the dim interior into washed-out daylight. We were on a windy concrete landing field, about 20 feet from plane. The guards spread out, creating an aisle. Molly was carried by two guards, wrapped in a brown sheet of canvas. The young priest still held onto the pole that stuck out of the sheet's tattered folds. She began to shake and convulse in their struggling grips before the young priest flicked the collar switch on and off a few times, eliciting muffled screams from behind the ball gag they'd put on Molly, sending her into one last, massive spam that almost lifted the guards off their feet before she went limp again. They recovered themselves, and jogged quickly up the unfolded stairs into the plane. We were soon in the air. I'd been instructed to sit in the forward passenger compartment. I'd caught a glimpse of the section behind as they'd carried Molly through, a bare metal hangar, like a larger version of the cold back of the van. I was there for a long time, not liking the sounds I could hear coming from behind me. Eventually, they subsided. I felt alone in the forward compartment, the only other person a Swiss guard, standing stiffly to attention and refusing to answer my questions. A dusty whispering built up in my head, barely perceptible at first, but intensifying until it was louder than the howling of the aircraft engines. The guard gave no indication of hearing anything. "You are nervous, little liar," came a voice, like an animal scratching across dead leaves. I must have startled, because the Swiss guard standing off to the side looked at me and asked, in a voice made distant by the rushing whispers that slid through my skull, if I was experiencing anything unusual. I instinctually said no, and the guard reluctantly turned away from me. Skittish, pliant, toothless, not even the spine or conviction to be a good carrier of the plague they filled you with. The only way I could imagine responding was with my own thought. "Hello? Hello? Is this you? Is this the demon?" No, little liar. It's the gay thoughts again. That's a strange joke for something like you to make. Molly O'Neill, the real original Molly O'Neill, is a little ball of pain and fear in the palm of my hand, coiling and wriggling and pissing herself. I know what she knows. I remember what she remembers, and I know what she thought of you. As she saw it, nobody your age becomes a priest nowadays, not unless they're running from something. Just let her go. She's innocent. She did nothing to deserve this. You believe that things should happen to beings based on whether you like what they did previously? I wasn't lied to. The creatures of the epiderm are bizarre things. What's the epiderm? What's hell? That's where you're from. It's what you call the place I come from. The epiderm is what I call the place you come from. Aren't you not meant to respond to me? Gird your soul against the darkness and all that? I can't say I took his advice, so much as I couldn't think of anything to say, so a silence took over. "Speaking of things Molly remembers," came the voice, slipping through the brief, tense silence that descended. "Did you hear the one about your mother sucking cocks in hell?" "Leave me alone, demon." "It was just a joke," said the voice. "There are no cocks in hell." "Why me? Why is it me you're talking to?" "You're being the most interesting, at least on the inside. You're the one with the least belief. Everyone else, their faith is a burning inferno. Yours is a numb, passionless mass right at the base of your mind. They're all sure of themselves, sure of who they are and what they're for. But you are so lost and filled with repressed doubt that you'd have a pleasant little conversation with a demon on your way to an exorcism. I don't blame you. They're not doing much to make you feel like part of the team. Have they even told you where we're going? You're wrong. I swore an oath to serve Jesus Christ in all my thoughts and actions. I did not take it lightly, and it is not a decision for which I feel doubt. There was a brief lull where I fancied for a moment that I'd put the beast in its place. Then, all in an instant, curiosity and dread defeated me. Where are we going? Cruel, dry laughter swept through my mind. The big city.